Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. It's myself, George, joined once more by Tom Woods, and bringing back to the channel Jed for a very special review. This is, of course, the Steven Spielberg Retrospective, and we are now up to his fourth film in this series, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, released in 1977. I'm going to get in there already. It's one of the biggest sci-fi films of that year, but not the biggest sci-fi film from that year. That's something else which no doubt will get brought up a fair amount across tonight's video. But first of all, I want to ask you, how are we both today?
I'm very well, thanks, George. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Excited to talk about Close Encounters.
Excellent. It feels really weird doing videos in daylight. Obviously, these are all pre-recorded, and it's actually like midday for a change, which I'm really not used to. So when this does get broadcast in an evening, it will look even weirder. But before we sort of get into all of that, I want to hear you guys in the comments below. Comment your thoughts on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Now, this is one of the big Spielberg films. I know he has a lot of big Spielberg films, but this is one of the ones that has its place in his filmography and all that kind of stuff. So please do comment those thoughts. If you're a sci-fi fan, if you're a fan of his work, everything is welcome. And please do hit that like button and subscribe. We've got a lot more Spielberg stuff on the way. As this is the fourth entry of the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. There are 34 films, not including the Fabelmans, so it's a very much a long-term project. So please do that, and you can find our social medias below: Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook, and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. Now, getting to this, we've been able to put someone on the spot each time they come on. Tom, you joined me on Duel, so I don't have to ask you this. Jed, I feel like I might have said this to you the other day when we were chatting, but I'm kind of asking everybody, do you remember maybe the first Spielberg film you ever saw, or the maybe some big moments you might remember when you were younger? Because I think everyone's got varying answers.
I can't remember the first one that I saw, but I remember sort of maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I started watching a bunch of his films. Over the course of a few weeks, I just watched lots of them. And I think the first one I did out of them was Close Encounters. So I watched Close Encounters. Then over the next few days and weeks, I did a few others. So I did E.T., Jurassic Park, Schindler's List as well. I think I did a few of them just all in one go. Yes, that was good because he's made so many great films.
No, that's pretty excellent. I think as well with his work, everyone's going to have a different story, right? You know, with Star Wars, it's very much you're from the 70s era, you're from the special editions, you're with the prequels, you're with the sequels, right? Everyone tends to tell the same story, but so far in this, Tom, me and you both had War of the Worlds. We've had a couple of people with Jaws as well. Now we've had Close Encounters. It's really exciting to see what different people are saying about it, and that's really cool. And kind of been following with this, Tom, you don't get another question on the spot, otherwise I'll be racking up. I'll have too many questions to do across the next few months, too many people. But I'm going to sort of get into it. I always read out the IMDb plot synopsis. I'm still not sure why, but it's become a thing for this now. And this one's a pretty lengthy one. Sometimes you're lucky to get a sentence. Sometimes you'll get 2 paragraphs. And this one is horrible. Roy Neary, an Indiana electric lineman, finds his quiet and ordinary day life turned upside down after a close encounter with a UFO, spurring him to an obsessed cross-country quest for answers as a monumentous event approaches. I'd actually read that before I'd copied and pasted it, so I didn't even know that myself. Now, if we're going to get into the memories of this film, we always speak about the first time we've seen a film. If it's the first time we've seen it, Tom, I'm going to hand over to you because I obviously put you on the spot of a question first. So, can you remember the first time you saw this, maybe? Or
I can, and one of the things. So, originally, when I sort of first quote watched it, I didn't watch it all the way from the beginning. So it was quite a new experience when I eventually did sort of watch it from the very start. But usually in sort of the younger years, I'd catch it the very end, say the last 25 minutes of it, the big 25 minutes. And that was sort of my first experience of viewing it. It wasn't until much later that I actually watched the whole thing from start to finish, depending on one of the 3 versions that are available. But yeah, I found myself, even when I was young, sort of mesmerized by that closing act, and that's still stuck with me for years.
And Jed, I know you sort of mentioned you'd seen a fair few. Can you remember your immediate thoughts of this one? Like, were you hooked on it, or did this make you want to
Yeah.
watch more of his other films?
I remember really loving it. I thought it was great, and it made me want to go watch so many of his other ones afterwards. And after watching them all, I thought, you know what, this is really great and probably one of his better films. And it's sort of, at the time when I watched, I hadn't seen many of his other films, and then it slowly started as I've watched more of them. My ranking of the films have changed, and at the minute, like now, I've seen all of them except for The Colour Purple. And it was in my top 10. And then I rewatched the film earlier this week. I was thinking, is it going to stay in my top 10 or is it going to change after watching it again? And watching it again, I'm like, yeah, this is still great and one of his best films, definitely in his top 10.
Yeah, it's fascinating this because I'd never seen it until today at the time of recording. I've said that 3 out of the 4 videos now, which is really bad. And Jaws I basically saw once and ruined my life, so that doesn't really count as such. But with this one, I was quite excited. Now, this is, I don't know if you guys have you ever had a film that you've had on you've had on like Blu-ray and you've never watched it, then you end up buying like a newer copy of it. It might be DVD onto Blu-ray or something. So I had this like years ago. Like when I first started buying films, I bought it on Blu-ray, never watched it, never got round to it. It's probably a politer term. And then I remember my dad saying once that he was convinced we had it on VHS in some like limited edition box. I don't think he'd seen either. And I remember going to the garage a couple of years ago, digging it out, and it was just a black video box. It wasn't anything special. And I was like, oh, that's a bit of a shame. I think he thought it was The Man Who Fell to Earth because he's a massive Bowie fan, and still never saw it. And then with the series kicking off, obviously last week we did Jaws. A lot of the guys involved were like, you got to see the Jaws on 4K, and HMV had some offers, so I ended up buying this on 4K. So I keep putting these up. Not every one of his films is available. I don't own all his films yet, but I like waving them around on these to make it a bit more visual for people. But seeing this today, was it 2022, 40 plus years since this came out, I thought it was remarkable on a first viewing. I was surprised that it feels like a massive understatement to say I'm surprised at how good a film is. I think when you're coming off the back of Jaws, you're a very young director still, and you're able to churn out your first sci-fi film into something of this quality, I thought was incredible. And I think as well, maybe with myself or maybe a generational thing, there's like that term old school sci-fi, right? When you think of 2001, you think of, it's not Star Wars. Modern sci-fi, you think of Star Wars, you think of like lasers, battling, whereas we don't get that like space exploration anymore, which is kind of like the ultimate of this. This is, when you come into contact with aliens, essentially. And that's what I found was a really interesting draw, that it felt like a very different type of sci-fi film to what I've seen before. And obviously you got to put it into context, the ones I have seen. I'm not going to say Paul is anything similar to it. It's not, but even Spielberg's own work, like E.T., is almost a vaguely similar premise, but obviously it came out a few years after, and it's amazing to go back and see something like this from 77. And for anyone that just buy home meter, the 4K is absolutely remarkable. Again, it's those older films that do get the best remastering of film reels or that kind of stuff. So I'm going to keep harping on that. Go buy physical media, people. But aside from that, as I said, I thought I really enjoyed it. I kind of want to actually go over some of the behind the scenes stuff about this one first. So I'm not too sure. Obviously, Tom, you mentioned there's 3 cuts. I didn't know this until today, so I saw the director's cut. I just want to kind of ask both of you guys: have you seen which of the 3 have you seen, or do you know what ones you've seen?
For me, it's been directors and theatrical. The most recent one I watched was the theatrical cut, which is the one I think isn't really it's the one Spielberg that said in interviews that was rushed. He was rushed into completion for it, and whilst it was a smooth production after Jaws, I don't know if you've seen any of the sort of behind the scenes on the on your physical copy, but there's a really great interview on the Blu-ray, sort of 30th anniversary interview with Spielberg, where he goes into a lot of detail about the process of making it. So the ideas were from before Jaws was even started filming, and it was only because of Jaws that he managed to get it financed, and everyone wanted to finance his next project, which is remarkable. I don't think had Jaws not been a massive success, then it may have turned out a little bit differently. And I think from what Spielberg says, that 3 years later he released the special edition, got a chance to go back and film extra additional sequences, but put in a sequence that primarily, or from his own words, was a mistake, which was when Roy heads into the ship itself at the very end. Spoilers for a 40-something odd year old film. But yeah, I mean, it's good to see that he's, still thinks that there are tweaks to be made and that it's not a perfect film. But I do think it is one of, if not, in his top 5 films that he's made. I love it, and the behind the scenes stuff is fascinating, and the fact that he's says after Jaws anything's easy compared is.
Anything you might have read, or because I've got a couple I'd love to read off.
I saw the director's cut, I think it was, but I never like it with films, and there are so many different cuts. I think fine, have a theatrical cut and then maybe one other if that was rushed or has studio interference or something, maybe one other cut. But when you've got more than 2 different versions of the same film, it gets ridiculous. I know I don't want to start you off, George, on Star Wars and George.
No, I was going to bring up.
The one that annoys me is Blade Runner, because I've seen that twice now, 2 different versions, and I don't really like that film. But everyone is like, oh, you haven't seen the right version of Blade Runner. You need to watch this one. It's like, I've watched 2 different versions of the film. If I didn't enjoy either of them, do I need to keep watching all these other half dozen versions of a film to get the good version? It's like, I know it's a controversial take, not liking Blade Runner. I do like the sequel, but there just shouldn't be this many versions of one film.
I'll let your comments slide, Jed.
No, it's a really good point, because when I saw there was 3, I think in this day and age, the worst ones is you'd get a film right. I think was it Fast and Furious 7? Get the extended. Because like, what could you have possibly extended from a Fast and Furious?
Only extra 5 minutes.
It's like 1 minute,
ridiculous.
Yeah. And it will just be an extended action sequence, and it really frustrates me that they try this. And this is where I kind of came with this film, that because I want to say it's uncommon for Spielberg to do this. I don't think he's done this for many of his films. Obviously, we'll find out over the next 8 months how many he's done. But to get 3, and then I did think in 1980 when that first special edition came out, there was also a special edition of a Star Wars film in 1980, the very first one, which is when they called it Episode 4, not Star Wars. And to keep, we'll bring George Lucas quite a bit tonight, because obviously him and Spielberg, their relationship, as friends and filmmakers. It always makes me think, like, did Lucas say anything, but did they see that Star Wars was doing new things, and did they think, why don't we do it with Close Encounters? I don't think it would have been as commercially driven as, let's change it because we can. I think it would have been a different approach that, as you said, Tom, he's not finished with what he wanted to do.
Yeah. I think there could be some element of that. Obviously, we weren't alive in the 70s, so don't really know the ins and outs, or didn't work on the film. I mean, I'd have loved to been working on it, but alas, I'm resided to talking about it in 2022. But yeah, I mean, from the sounds of it, from sort of the backstage behind the scenes corporate side of the world, that Columbia were in a sort of financial, not a very good financial position at the time, which meant that they were trying to get him to finish it as soon as possible, which meant that perhaps some of the vision, some of the scenes that he wanted to include that he couldn't get around to filming, were sort of left at the wayside. But it was a good opportunity to then get the additional funding to film those extra bits. Although the one stipulation was, of course, if we'll give you the money if you show us the inside of the spaceship, which Spielberg has stated was he said yes to it, but it was a mistake to put it in at all, and then to go back and tweak it even further, removing that from the special edition. It all depends really on sort of. I quite like the idea of multiple cuts of things if it's done right, and if they work if a director's vision isn't realized in one particular cut, then they can go back or have the opportunity to go back and fix or envisage the film that they wanted. It doesn't work so well if you have just stick 5 extra minutes onto something and call it a director's or extended cut. That doesn't work so well. But it gave him a good opportunity to tweak the film that I think he, even 40 odd years later, he still really loves.
Yeah, and kind of what you said, Jez, I'll bring up Star Wars. It's really interesting that with some of these cuts, Tom, what you said, I like the way I've always seen it. If the director's made a film, and this is why I'm pretty chilled of the Star Wars specialist, and sorry to divert into that it was inherently George Lucas changing George Lucas's films. I know he didn't direct 5 and 6, but they are his films. He literally owned them. I guess we can't say anymore. And what I dislike now is when studios come down the line saying, "Yeah, we're going to change this film that we had no involvement in." And I think a really recent random one, if you guys are familiar with Spider-Man 3.5, I think they called it, or the editor's cut, where for some reason, 10 years after Spider-Man 3 came out, they had an editor's cut where they literally added in a delete scene of the sandcastle and changed a few shots. Because it had nothing to do with Sam Raimi, let's call it the editor's cut. It doesn't. I think it was obviously an editor that did it, but it's really dumb. And it's like a lot of the concept of fan edits is an entirely different conversation. But when you see studios like giving an editor an actual real film to cut, you're like, why? I know it's your job in your day job, but not 10 years after a film's come out that you didn't direct. So that's kind of my hearsay. And as I said, I'm okay with the Star Wars special editions. I think as time has gone by, some of those changes have worked. Obviously, some haven't. But with Close Encounters, just to sort of round off, I saw the director's cut. Normally with things like this, I think Blade Runner is a really good example. I know Jed brought that up. I've only ever seen the final cut. I've never seen the other ones. I've heard so many varying stories. I'll quite happily stick to that. Lord of the Rings, obviously, again, that's a worthy one. But pretty much an hour of footage extra, so you can understand that for each of those. That is quite essential viewing. Whereas, as I said, some films is just an absolute joke. And Tom, you brought up earlier the fact that Jaws was a massive success. We've got to bring that up as well. Is that Jaws was the highest grossing film in history, obviously until Star Wars came out. And when Spielberg was able to come into this, he had increased not just budget, but he had control over the film as well. Obviously, we spoke in this. I know the Jaws video isn't out at the time of us to be recording this, but we spoke in the video about all the issues on set with Jaws, the absolute chaotic production, and the fact that, again, following up Jaws, Spielberg is able to make something of this quality. Sometimes directors might dip, they might have a bit of a break, but there's no stopping Spielberg with what follows. And I think that's a really fascinating edge to sort of bring it to. But one thing I really want to bring up is that Tom, in the first episode on Duel, me and you spoke about there's like an asterisk with this whole series' name, that his first ever film he directed is called Firelight, but it's never ever been publicly released. It was, I think, shown for one cinema showing when he was 18 years old, and he claims it made a dollar profit. But I believe there's only 3 minutes of footage online that anyone can see. I don't know if it's disjointed. I don't know if it's a scene. He's never ever allowed anybody to see it. Whether it still exists is another question. But a lot of his ideas for Firelight came into Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I think when you look at the reports of this, it goes back to the early 70s, him first trying to get this film made. And I wonder if this is not a passion project. So I hate this kind of terms, but this is a film that he has had in the pipeline for a very long time. And when you get to that final 25, 30 minutes, it's really interesting that it's had this build-up for sort of 2 hours. And how do you sustain that into the production? And that's where I kind of feel this film, that it was sort of heading into Spielberg's direction. It's remarkable that he has, this quality so young in his career. I think he might have, is he 30 at the point this film came out? I'm not too sure. Might have even been younger than that still. It's really interesting seeing his development across such a short span of films. And the fact that we sit here, as you said, Tom, in 2022 talking about it online, and it's still fundamentally held in such high regard for an industry that, we've got to say as well, it had a sci-fi boom. As soon as, I know Star Wars, they'll say, is primarily the reason, but to get Close Encounters and Star Wars out in the same year, of course, that's going to encourage the sort of sci-fi films that followed it up. And that's why I kind of just want to sort of play to you both. How do you feel about this direction compared to Jaws or seeing him take on? Because it's a very mature film. I know a lot of his other ones have been more action heavy or had these moments, but this is like mature viewing, and I don't see a lot of younger people enjoying it. I think it's a film that I appreciate it. I can't say I'd like saw as a kid I hadn't, but being at the age I am now probably made it a better view than had I been about 10, which I think is always a really interesting dynamic when you see a film for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a younger audience would get some enjoyment from it, especially the last 25 minutes. But I think in terms of his direction, what you say is correct. It is much more. It's a lot more mature in its pace than say something like Jaws. And Jaws, not that I'm rinsing on Jaws. Jaws is easily in the top 5 Spielberg films. But there's just a different edge to it. Whilst Jaws is very, not to use the overblown phrase of gritty, but it does have that sort of bite to it. Not to use the shark puns, but whereas Close Encounters is very more. It's almost like an opera in the way it's produced and the way it's filmed, and everything's very much slow paced, and the big set pieces are very methodically put together. I think it's Spielberg at his best, and especially early on in his career, and it's only sort of goes up from here. I think what he said on the subject of that last 25 minutes, he compared it to a symphony, which I really enjoyed that description of it. So the last 25 minutes is sort of this big musical symphony that just is put together both by the score, by the editing, and the way it's shot, the way it's filmed, and using musical tones for first contact is, I think, one of the most ingenious and interesting things that has come out of a sci-fi film in years, for sort of a way to communicate with extraterrestrials. And Spielberg even at the time was a big believer in sort of close encounters, but has since his skepticism has taken over years later. But yeah, I think you can tell that it's a film made by someone that at the time was really big into UFO sightings.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that he must have been thinking about for a while, because going a step up, like thinking Jaws, that's like, what's it like, these people coming across a shark? And now aliens are sort of like a whole step up from sharks. And he's done that. He's got sharks, Jaws, aliens here, dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. That's something. Humankind's encounters with all these creatures must have been something that he's interested in and has thought about for ages, because again, sort of like thinking back to Jaws, one of the things that makes it so good is how little you see of the shark. And it's the same in Close Encounters. Like, you don't actually see the extraterrestrials much at all. Like, for the vast majority of the film, it's just flashing lights and musical tones, and that's literally it. And he manages to make that so appealing and so interesting to know, sort of, to make us interested in what these aliens are doing here, who they are, and how this contact's going to go about. And I think the final 25 minutes, 30 minutes or so of the film is incredible, because he takes like something so extraordinary and so huge, like humans' first encounters with extraterrestrials, and he portrays it in such a simple way of just music and flashing lights, really. That's all it is. And yet he manages to make it simple and so complicated all at the same time. And it doesn't take away anything from it. It's so clever the way he does that coming off Jaws, moving into this, you don't need to show like big UFOs and aliens like the whole time. If the film was made today, no doubt there would be huge CGI spaceships and a bunch of aliens in the whole thing that it really doesn't need. And that's what makes the film so good, of how simple he keeps it, even though it's such an extraordinary topic and subject matter. He keeps it so simple and contained, something that he must have taken off the back of Jaws. And that's what makes it so good, how simple it is.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the sort of suspense of Jaws, because with this is really odd. Obviously, it's my fault I've not seen it, but when you've got classic films that people talk about online, and you might not have seen them, but you've seen all the photos from them. You've seen, I don't use the term spoilers on old films, but some films the ending because it's that prestige, right? I'd never seen the alien design from Close Encounters. I'd seen the bright lights, as everybody has. You'd seen the mothership, But what kind of fascinated me is how little you see of them, but to the point that, not that it's official, people aren't trying to keep it spoiler free. The integral part of this communication is the music. It is how they play, and they were the beats that I know about. I know that it was done sort of via music, and we know that Spielberg loves his scores. We've got John Williams, who we'll get to in a bit with this as well. But it's almost like a suspense to that final 20 minutes that I think, without sort of slaughtering modern audiences, there's a lack of patience in cinema now. I really appreciate a slow burn, and I think slow burn's a really unfair term to use nowadays, but it is used a lot, and it's about building up to this moment where they're going to meet these aliens, and you can't build up that suspense, when you have the ship in the desert, and then it's incredible. How did that get there? Why? And you as the audience are asking that as well as the the viewer and the people inside the film, and even the storyline with the little kid, which we'll speak about some characters in a bit. That whole, where it's going to go. You've got the sort of the kid that's going to go in there, and it's about building up to those moments. How much of them can we see without seeing them? And as you both sort of said, that's expertly taken from Jaws and applied it to a whole new genre, and it still works. And it sort of becomes this, not trait of his, but I use the term, was it Tom? Did we talk about Duel? I can't remember. Hitchcock being a master of suspense. Or that might have been the Jaws video. And I think Spielberg's very underrated in how he does these films. I always jump to the Jurassic Park reveal of the T-Rex, one of the best reveals as far as I'm concerned in cinema. With the way that's built up in the entire film, that we don't see it for so long, and any dinosaurs for that fact as well. And it's really interesting seeing him take these sort of different films and apply these similar concepts to them. And what kind of really what struck me with this was the fact that, maybe again, this is the modern lens. How many films now? Oh, there's aliens. Let's get the army. Let's have that general that we know is going to turn. And this is what kind of fascinated me watching this, is that I know this sounds really odd. Spielberg is the director where I have always seen the the villain, the man in suits, sort of like an Agent Smith type, right? How many Spielberg films have government officials coming in with weapons to control the lands, do all that kind of stuff? Happens in a lot of his films. And yet in Close Encounters, the one I would have thought it would have been in first, there's nothing. This is an exploration project. We're not going to have the military going gung-ho. We're not going to have this. This is the communication between aliens and between us. And that's kind of what's really struck me with this film, that this isn't even a stereotype of his later work. This is something incredibly new. And going back to what we've all said as well, I feel that this has been in the pipeline for so long because it's such a mature take on an exploration film. And I'm sure there have been other films where we do have aliens coming to Earth before this, done in different ways, but visually and stylistically, this just stands out. And you wouldn't think it's from the 70s. Honestly, it looks so incredible, and the story's so tight. It's kind of this could be set in any year. Not that I want anyone to dare remake it. Just the way this film is shot, it never feels contextual to 1977. It feels like it's a part of ever. And I think that's a very underrated factor in a lot of films, where some big films or some directors' work is so sort of locked contextually with subject matter or politics or anything at the time to their time. They don't age as well. Whereas this one, I think, ages phenomenally.
Oh, definitely. The thing that I would say is essentially is that the reveal of the aliens themselves, I think, leaves a little bit to be desired. And I think is sort of, because you get the really cool looking sort of otherworldly, long-legged, long-limbed alien coming out of the ship, and then you just get little grey aliens. It's just like, okay, so we're going with that, and I think it just ruins. Not ruins is maybe the wrong word, but it takes away that mystery, mysterious element to it. But I think they are quite horrifying when they can be, especially the scene in the middle of the film where the child gets taken. I think Spielberg has said that it's a film about childhood optimism. The thing that children do is go towards the lights and look at things in a different way, whereas adults will sort of run scared and hide in different places. And one of the good things is that the main characters also reflect that. So each one of the sort of main characters is sort of innocent and childlike in the way that they view the encounters themselves. You've got Roy there, becoming quite obsessed and wanting to know, what's going on and find out answers and essentially the truth. So there's that childhood optimism that I think runs throughout the entire film, and its theme, I think, plays expertly into some of his future work as well.
Now, the childhood optimism is a really interesting one, because I think with Aliens, that's just like everyone will be excited by it. Like, even though you don't know they could be scary and trying to kill you, like Independence Day sort of aliens destroy the world, but there's something we don't know anything about aliens. It's like Jaws with sharks. People are scared of sharks, whether that's because of Jaws as a film. And if you've not seen it, that might be a different matter. Like, you don't go running towards a shark that you see because it's going to be dangerous. An alien, there's just so much potential. What's that alien going to be like? Is it a good alien? Is it a bad alien? And I think the film portrays that really well. People are eager to see what an alien is like and to see what it's like in reality. Well, it's a film, not real life. They want to know why the alien's here, what the alien is like, and I think that represents a lot of people, because we want to know what aliens are like, if they are actually real or not, and all that sort of thing. I think the film portrays that really well.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I think even if you push forward the clocks to E.T., you mentioned like childhood optimism. That is the almost the carbon sort of follow-up, isn't it? That this is them taking in the alien now and treating it as on their own, because it's the kids doing it, not the adults. And it's a really interesting thing when you look at a lot of his work, you can actually see that come through. It's a really good point. And yeah, going to Jurassic Park again, you've got the kids wanting to see the dinosaurs, whereas the adults like, no, let's not do this right now. And it's a really interesting point, and it's what we suggest as well, that with Jaws that creates fear, but aliens, it is an unknown. And it's obviously something that he does. Obviously, let's bring up one of the elephants in the room. Indiana Jones, that has aliens in it now. Whether or not that stays as aliens next year, we'll find out. But it's really fascinating, sort of reading into how and why they do it. And I guess what sort of bringing in some of the characters. Let's talk Roy Neary, obviously played by Richard Dreyfuss, who was in Jaws with him. Quite incredible seeing the list of actors that sort of turned it down. And the biggest shock was Jack Nicholson wanted to play it. I couldn't see Jack Nicholson doing this film. I mean, Jack Nicholson is one of the best actors ever, but I like the fact that Richard Dreyfuss at the time isn't as big a name as he would argue to be. And I would say to this day, I don't think Richard Dreyfuss is as big a household name as a lot of other actors from that era. They list people like Al Pacino turning it down. I couldn't ever imagine Al Pacino going up against aliens, unless it's a comedy of some kind. That would honestly be the weirdest. Imagine Al Pacino coming face to face with an alien. Like, you're just going to expect him to like make a noise or something, aren't you? Like, it's really awkward. But there's something about Richard Dreyfuss where I don't. This is like a horrible thing, but he doesn't have the face of a star. He has like not even like a theatrically trained actor. He feels like an everyday man, and that's the concept of the film. They just wanted this to be a story of it just happening to normal people. And I love the fact that it isn't, an A-lister, and even with his role in Jaws, of the main three, he's the one spoken about the least of those main three. It probably made him the easiest one to use in that respect. And I've really enjoyed his character. I love the family dynamic that we're dealing with, his descent into the madness, that his wife's going to have to leave and take the kids with him. And we'll get to sort of scenes later, but one of my favourite scenes is the first time he has the experience in the car with the beam and everything flying through. I thought he was superb in this. I really enjoyed him. And again, when we're doing this series, I'm going to be sort of not judging them from a Spielberg perspective, but when you're seeing these actors that keep coming into a lot of his films, because so many directors do, obviously these actors they work well with, which they absolutely should do. It's amazing how I was able to differentiate this from Jaws, albeit some of the moments, or I guess you could say like a set piece of this film are very similar, as we've kind of said, with that, the reveals and dealing with this sort of individual object. And his performance is one of the best. I don't think he's the best performance tonight. I'll get to the character later, but I'm kind of curious, what do you think of the whole family dynamics? We obviously get a lot of time with him and his family, which I think really does help build up how important this event's going to be. You know, when we get the scenes in the house of him building it, him losing his mind, and it's a really interesting way to stage a film like this. I don't think many films would choose to focus on an individual as much as they do.
No, it's definitely a dynamic that plays throughout the entire film here. The Roy becoming obsessed with his experience and sort of isolating himself and his and isolating himself from his family. And there's a bit I remember, you know, where he's getting all the mashed potato, and like it.
Yeah.
You know, the Simpsons reference was just on point. I don't know if any one of you has seen the episode where Homer goes to clown college, but he's doing exactly the same thing and building a tent out of mashed potato. Watch it. If not, it's
rings about.
pretty good.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I've seen a meme about the clown college. Maybe I've seen it and just forgotten.
But it you know, I think that's sort of where I picked it up from, and having, you know, watch Simpsons religiously, especially the earlier seasons. I thought, that's where that came from. That's where that's from. All this sort of reference. But anyway, that's sort of a Simpsons tangent that I just kind of didn't expect to get into. But going back to characters, I seem to remember. I don't know if it's. And like, someone can correct me if I'm wrong after the fact, but I seem to remember a quote or something Spielberg has said where if at the time he was a father, he wouldn't have made the ending that he did, where Roy goes into the spaceship or the mothership. I seem to remember that being something that Spielberg has said, and I think. One of the things, like, because obviously the whole idea behind it is, you know, this childhood optimism, and Roy wants to experience these new events for himself, but sort of seemingly abandons his family on Earth, and it. I don't know. I think had he made it in the future, then perhaps that's an ending that might not have been chosen. But regardless, it's all about seeking out new experiences and seeking out, you know, answers to questions. Obviously, they find the big one: is their life out on, you know, out there? Obviously, the answer in this film is a big yes. Yeah, I think the character dynamics are fantastic, especially the two, Julian. I can't remember her name.
The actress or the character, Gillian Goulet, played by
the
villain.
Yeah.
The mother.
I was thinking about the character. The way they meet is quite extraordinary, and had Roy, you know, not slammed his brakes on it might have been a totally different film. But no, it's the dynamics are the strongest point of the film, I'd say.
Yeah, I think the characters and the relationship between them all is really important. And one film that only came to mind a few minutes ago, when you mentioned Jack Nicholson was considered for the role, it made me think of The Shining, and how the two films, even though you don't immediately, it doesn't seem clear, but the two are actually very similar in that you're focusing on sort of a kid, a guy, and a woman sort of for most of the film. And it's the dynamic and the relationship between them all that makes the final 25 minutes of the film so good and so impactful. And it's the same with The Shining and Close Encounters here, that if you don't have the first sort of hour and a half, hour and however long it is, with sort of slowly building up these characters and learning about them, that the finale isn't as impactful if you don't have that. And that's why we've sort of all mentioned the last 25 minutes of the film and how big that is for the film, and sort of humankind. But it's because we've had these relationships with these characters beforehand, seeing Roy and his family, sort of the scene with the mashed potato where he's just going crazy. And it's sort of seeing that descent into madness as he's being consumed by these spaceships and idea of extraterrestrial life. It's seeing that so that when we finally get there in the end, the payoff is as big as it is. and it works as well as it does. And the same goes with Melinda and with the kid as well, that sort of seeing their fascination with the spaceships and with the aliens all the way up until you get to that point when you finally meet them at the end of the film. It's because of all that it works.
Yeah, I'm kind of sort of blown away by something Tom mentioned. So with Spielberg, you mentioned that he'd have done it differently about kids. I saw an amazing interview. I think it might have been just before or after Jurassic Park came out. It's definitely before Schindler's List. And he was speaking about the fact that he at the time he wanted to make films for his kids. He had kids at that point. And it's really interesting because if you look at some of his later films, you have stuff like Hook, a lot of family films. His sort of direction tone changed massively. And a comparison I've been drawn into is actually Interstellar. So obviously very random. Yes, it's sci-fi, but it's more of an exploration side of things where I think the big crux for Nolan was that his daughter was born just at the end of either pre-production or production, and it was going to originally be about a father and son relationship. He switched it to a father-daughter and about him wanting to get back to that daughter. And it's really interesting how directors are able to like look at their personal life and put it into their filmmaking styles. And it is quite not funny, but when you sort of really done like, oh yeah, he just like packed up, left his entire family, and just went to space. Like it's kind of funny, but it's not. But I think because they've, as we've both said, they've built up to that. They've written the story that, you know, yes, this functions as a film about the extraterrestrial life, but as we've said, it also functions about someone losing their mind about these ideas or their experiences. And I think, as you know, if those don't work fundamentally, the last 25 minutes wouldn't work. And if the last 25 minutes didn't work, then the whole concept of a film called Close Encounters just can't work. And it's remarkable they're able to do it. And kind of talking about Gillian as well with the son. The moment you get the encounters with the 4-year-old, you know, when he wakes up in bed and you've got the toys, you're like that kid is gonna not cause a problem, but you know he's gonna end up with the aliens. It's such a cinematic term. I don't know if that even is a thing, but when you, as you said, it's that innocence of youth, them going out exploring. You know that he's going to be integral to this, and I really enjoy the fact that we have this subplot with the mother. You know, that's just trying to protect the son, and they just keep coming for him, and the son wants to go, and they never once try and romanticize it. They never try and get her in a relationship with Roy. They're never trying to fundamentally make them like, look, an alien couple. It ultimately ends up being just two people helping each other out, and I think it creates a really interesting character dynamic for them. I think you get a really weird scene when you got like a meetup of like all the, I don't want to call them hippies, like the believers. Is that a term? When they're all there on the roads waiting, and they say it's like Halloween for adults. I loved all that kind of things, and it makes you think in this. You know, obviously it's 77 when that came out, but you know nowadays, you know, really off topic. But remember, like Storm Area 51, like yeah, half the people there were joking, but you do know that there were some people in that Storming 51 conspiracy that actually thought that it would all be real, and it's always interesting seeing like how individuals and, you know, obviously social media, you get to sort of, it's like flat earthers, isn't it? It's all that nonsense you read about, but it's really interesting seeing the approach and having those kind of characters leading the film. Obviously, this is done in a way that could be credible to itself. It's not about the Earth being flat. Maybe there's a Close Encounters for flat earthers one day. That'd be absolutely ridiculous to watch. Netflix will probably fund it though for 200 million, so it's their most streamed film of the year, knowing them. I kind of want to talk about the soundtrack. Does anyone else want to talk about any of the characters? Because I think we spoke about the mother son and the family dynamic. I'm pretty good to move on to John Williams, unless anyone wants to jump in or.
No, please do.
Straight to John Williams.
This is like, I keep saying that this doubles up as a John Williams retrospective, pretty much, by like Harry Potter and Star Wars. Someone's gonna be angry. I missed another film. I'm sure I have, but he's come on, he's done everything. I love the fact that there is a lack of soundtrack until the last 25 minutes. That we are so reliant on the what is there an official term, Tom, for the communication? I just keep calling it the keyboard. The keyboard stuff. Feels like I'm insulting musicians everywhere.
Yeah. Well, they're five tones, and there was something in the behind the scenes where if it was 4, it would be too short, and if it was like 6 or 7, then it would be considered a song, the start of a song, and I think they didn't want that, so Williams decided to write this 5-piece sort of musical cue or tone, as it were. I think I've got that correct. I can never really remember.
And this is what I love about it, that sound isn't. I mean, Jaws is 2 notes, and that's the most terrifying 2 notes in cinema history. Probably the most iconic 2 notes in cinema history. And it's really interesting that the follow-up film of these 2 back together, yes, now getting 5 notes, but it's such a core point of the story that, within Jaws, obviously the characters aren't on a beach and hear the Jaws theme, but I love the fact that it's like diegetic sound in this, that it exists in their world, and we get to hear that as the viewer. But also, obviously, from a filmmaking perspective, it's a really smart way to do it. And as you said earlier, Tom, it's ingenious having their communication be music. Now, I don't know if anyone else got. Maybe you saw this before you saw Arrival, or you might have seen this after Arrival. I kept thinking of Arrival when the mothership lands. So, how are they going to talk? And it's all via music. Obviously, Arrival is the excellent film. I saw it for the first time actually, so it's quite fresh in my mind. But I just love the concept that it wasn't just aliens get out and are fluent in English, or we're getting aliens that we're just getting subtitles at the bottom or stuff like that. Because it's fine for stuff like Star Wars, Star Trek, where it's Doctor Who, that's designed to be like that. But when it's an exploration film, I don't want it to be so simple that or they can work out what the aliens mean at the click of a finger. I hate that kind of thing. So to me, the soundtrack in this, I think it's a very underrated score, because yes, there are those notes, but when you do get to the actual music, you get a little bit at the start and towards the end. I think it's just John Williams on fine form again. He's probably not going to bash him once in the next 8 months, but his work is unbelievable. And I did notice they play the Jaws theme as well. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, or if it's meant to be obvious, but they keep harping on the 2 notes. They're the third one in, and I was like, this is definitely a Jaws reference here.
I think I know which sort of.
It's towards the end. It's towards the end of all the music. It gets very slow, and then it's like it's almost like a little nod, and then they do it a couple of times.
I picked up on that. I wasn't sure whether that was the case or whether it was just coincidence. But yeah, I think you're probably right that it was sort of a reference. But I think the music here is used expertly, and like as you said, you don't get much in the way of any score until that essentially that last act, where it's just John Williams let loose, really, and it's fantastic to watch. And the music, while being bombastic and energetic, and having that spectacle of wonder, really accompanies the images and the film really, really well. And it just, like, I was my most recent viewing, I thought at the very end, I was like, that was fantastic. That was genuinely fantastic. Like, it built up such wonder and such like bemusement. I suppose bemusement isn't really the right word, but extraordinary and wonderful. And it's quite refreshing also to see that an alien doesn't come down and just kill everyone, which is really, really refreshing. But no, the communication, everything about the music is phenomenal. And whilst you don't get much, the very end is where John Williams is Spielberg. Well, it just seems like Spielberg said, there you go, off you go. Just do what you want.
I think that's because, like you were saying before, the end is like a symphony, and you need the music for that symphony.
Yeah.
So John Williams just completely lets loose and manages to do that. I think no one else could really probably do music for Alien Encounter quite in the same way that he does it, and he gets it so spot on. And even just with the 5 notes, like, what must it have been like trying to make what that 5-note sequence is going to be, that one that's become so iconic. Like I said to my dad the other day, I was watching Close Encounters when he got home, and he immediately makes those 5 notes, and it's just so known and connected with the film, because I don't know much about music, but John Williams has somehow managed to get a sequence of notes that's just so spot on that you can remember it, that when you hear it, when you only hear the first couple of notes, you immediately recognize it. And it seems believable that this is how humans can communicate with aliens. And it seems so believable that these notes work as a way of communication. Whereas if you say, before seeing this film, if you said humans contacting aliens with some musical notes and flashy lights. Like, it wouldn't really seem to work, but watching it and hearing it, it really does work. And John Williams just managed to get that so spot on.
Yeah, it's a really good point as well, because if you get that wrong, the film won't work as well. There's so much that has to work in that the final few moments that either step too far of it being too much of a concert, because it could have been that, could have easily jumped too far, or it could have been fell too short. That was a bit odd, but they nail it perfectly. And you got to think, for them to have the music playing in the world, that would have been not a post production, that would have been in production. When they made it, they'd have had to have had that in mind. And I always find it fascinating when you get certain composers that have those relationships with directors, that they'll be working with them from before the film's out, during and after, whereas some might come on with like 3 weeks to go and just crack a score out. And it's amazing to see what they were able to do with this. And I kind of even want to bring up this, I know it's again to bring it up, but obviously John Williams the same year did Star Wars. And maybe it's more common nowadays, but you have certain composers that, yes, they can do multiple scores a year, but when you've got 2 original concepts that are both sci-fi and different directors, it's incredible that they don't overlap, because so many soundtracks, as much as I love Hans Zimmer, a lot of his work can overlap. And even John Williams, to a point, I think he uses some of the same cues in Chamber of Secrets and Minority Report as Attack of the Clones, all 3 from the same year. It's really interesting that some composers can do that, but it's amazing to see how this score stands by itself, especially with obviously Star Wars, and they were both nominated for Oscars. Obviously, you wouldn't have Star Wars. What I want to talk about is sort of moving on from music. We spoke about sort of the quality of the film. As we also do, let's talk about this film's legacy, because it's been out 45 years this year. Obviously, it's the first time I've seen it. A big talking point is that it came out the same year as Star Wars. Now, I'm going to talk about there's a famous bet. So I mentioned a book before we hit live that I read that was a biography on George Lucas. It must have come out maybe 2015, 16. It's a really good read. Now, obviously, George Lucas and Spielberg would go on to make Indiana Jones with each other very soon, 2 weeks ago, I think, at the time of prepping these. And obviously, it's got a bit of a legacy, hasn't it? Those two being good friends, it works. John Williams, all the rest. So we'll all talk about it in a couple of weeks. The inception for the idea, the two were on holiday. It was before Star Wars came out, and it was before Close Encounters obviously came out. It was in 1977. Apparently, the two each put a bet on with each other. Spielberg thought that Close Encounters would flop and that everyone would go watch Star Wars. And George Lucas thought Star Wars would bomb and everyone would watch Close Encounters. And they both kind of won and failed, because neither film bombed. But obviously Star Wars was the biggest out of the two, and it's really amazing that these two legendary directors are like such close friends outside of filmmaking. And whilst they were on this holiday, that's where the idea came for Indiana Jones, is that they kind of said they'd want to make a film with each other and it'd be an adventure serial film. So preluding Close Encounters, it's a really cool behind the scenes story. Now, if anyone has read that George Lucas biography, there's a lot more detail on that famous holiday in 77. I think they were both exhausted. I think George Lucas was, obviously he'd break his back, or no, that's J.J. Abrams. He'd had a heart attack on the Star Wars, hadn't he? So much behind the scenes aggro for the two of them, and it's amazing looking at both their legacies since. So I really wanted to bring that up. Random to ask if anyone's heard of that story, but I'm sure there are many weird Star Wars stories, and with Lucas and Spielberg, we'll be able to delve into their relationship a little bit more in Indiana Jones. And box office, I wanted to bring up again. It's not the be all and end all, but I was very surprised to see how successful this film was. Obviously, it was the year Star Wars came out, and the way people speak about Close Encounters, it's almost like in modern terms they'd be like, oh yeah, no one watched Close Encounters because they were all talking about Star Wars, which is the kind of criticism Marvel films get, which is understandable but a bit odd sometimes. Random person online cries that no one watched a really random film that was out for a week versus Doctor Strange 2. I understand your complaints, but it's a very different system. But these are both original films, and it's really interesting that this came out on a November release date. Obviously, back then, summer blockbusters were still slowly forming at Jaws and Star Wars, and it would go on to make 300 million worldwide, which is an incredible number at the time. I think Star Wars was 460. To give you a number, this is probably in the top 5 or 10 highest grossing of all time, I would imagine. And its Oscar success, it was nominated for 8. I miscalculated. 8 nominations, including 2 wins. and those wins were Best Cinematography, and it won its own Best Sound Effects Oscar. What I really want to ask you both is what fascinated me. This took up 2 nominations: Best Director for Spielberg and Best Supporting Actress for Melinda Dillon, who obviously played Julian. I was really excited about it. I thought she was superb. I know we spoke about the performances, but would anything surprise you in that regard of Spielberg getting a director nomination so young, or not getting it for Jaws and getting it for this? I know the Oscars aren't really, if you drill it down, they're just awards, but when you look at the history of a film, it is nice when you get classics that are recognised contextually as well as sequentially.
Yeah, to be honest, it doesn't surprise me at all that, because the film is fabulous and breathtaking, and it doesn't surprise me that he was nominated for best director for it. It's one of his best films.
Yeah, I think the fact that it won cinematography and sound as well is pretty obvious from watching the film. Just the way it looks and sounds is incredible, and we've already spoken about most of this, but that makes the whole film, the sound and the way it looks. Without any of that, the whole film falls apart. And so I think it's good that it actually got recognised for that as well and actually won it, because so often you look at all these Oscar nominations and think the best film doesn't normally win. It might have got nominated, but there's so much other stuff that was better. But cinematography and sound, whilst I haven't seen every film that was released in 1977 to compare it to, I doubt anything else can come close to them.
Yeah, and that's it. And the cinematographer's name, apologies in advance on the pronunciation, is Vilmos Sigmund. He'd worked on a few of Spielberg's other films. He'd done the Sugarland Express. He hadn't done Duel, though. But obviously down the line, he didn't do too many after, which did surprise me. But it's really interesting that even up against Star Wars, this beat Star Wars. And that's the one thing I fully am on board with. That I thought the cinematography in this one was superb. And, a lot of people think cinematography is the framing. It's always been so much more than that. It's the lighting in this film, for me, that it has that significance that when you've got, again, that car scene, when you've got the light beaming through and the way they even shoot it of all the objects flying against the car seats and everything, it really deserved it. And as you said, Jed, you can't see everything, every film, especially nowadays. You probably can't even access half the films if you wanted to. But when you get the correct recognition, and the following year, the director did the cinematographer did Deer Hunter as well, which he was nominated for another Oscar with. It's such a fundamental part of this. I think if you get the cinematography wrong for this film as well, the film is also not going to function. That you need to be able to build up to the aliens, and I think with sci-fi films more than anything, there's so much to take into account, especially in I hate using terms of this, but like before CGI became in, like you get these amazing shots of the ships coming in, which looks incredible still today. But nowadays they can prep all that. Yeah, you can have storyboards back then too, but that would be the VFX would be prepped in advance for them to work around. And the fact they still couldn't do that back then, I think it just adds so much more to the skill of getting that sort of stuff done. But no, again, sort of me, very new to this film, I was so surprised it's box office and it's like Oscars, which is great because it's so easy to look at films 40, 50 years later and say XYZ should have won, XYZ was a box office bomb. But it's really nice when the correct films get that recognition off both audiences and, I don't want to say the Academy, but like the industry accolade, I guess, is a much better term. And I think that goes a long way. And obviously with Spielberg's career is the first of, I think, maybe 11 Best Director nominations now. I've lost count. Maybe eight or nine, I don't know. But we'll be bringing up, because it was a big talking point on Jaws that they didn't even nominate him, let alone have him win for Best Director, which was incredible when you think about what that film went through and what the outcome was. What I wanted to kind of ask you both, obviously we spoke a lot about characters, about the film itself, obviously the sort of last 20. Does anyone have any favorite scenes that they want to really quickly talk about? Maybe it's the ending, maybe it's stuff we've not spoke about, but there's anything in particular? I don't know what more if there is.
No, for me, the main scenes that stand out are his first encounter in his truck, obviously where he sees them, the cops chasing the UFOs is a great scene as well. And I mean the whole film builds up to the last 20-25 minutes, which is phenomenal. And those are sort of the big ones that I think are sort of my personal favorites. Obviously everyone's going to say the last 25 minutes, aren't they?
Yeah, so other than the last 25 minutes, I think when the kid gets abducted, though, that whole scene, just from the lighting of it all, like he opens the door and you've just got that huge orange light just shining through. I think the whole scene is just like classic Spielberg magic. It's just cinema magic, really. The way that, even though it's literally just a bright light, it's so much more than that. It's aliens, and he manages to convey that so well in that scene that it is more than just a bright orange light shining through the door.
Yeah, and it's when all the screws are all being done at the same time, and the grate goes, and I love what they're able to do with it. That, you know, I don't want to bring up Strange Things. I really don't want to bring up Strange Things, but you see why so many things have ripped off his work over the years, and it's because he's set this standard that I think only himself can top in dealing with blockbusters, especially when you have young actors in films. It's very challenging for, obviously, well, it depends what country, and obviously you've got very strict laws over here with young actors and stuff, but certain directors know how to use them, know how to work with them, whereas some don't. I think Spielberg's always got the balance right of adults and children in a film.
Yeah.
I think sometimes a film can spiral and get out of control, and it doesn't work. Mad Max 3 is probably a perfect example. But I think there's something about Spielberg's approach to film. Like, he knows, not that he's making it for young audience, because he isn't with this film, but as what you said, Tom, it's that child optimism. And as the time goes by, when he has his own family, he's making films for them, and he feels like a director that he puts that audience at the forefront. He wants to experience. He strikes me as a director that he wants to experience what he's making. Obviously, he's making the film; he can't experience it in that way. But he's one of those directors that comes out and says he enjoys watching his films, which some people say they shouldn't say, and they should say that. He's made classic films, and because he's such a lover of cinema, that's where his approach to filmmaking comes. I think it's such a simplistic approach, yet so many people try and dress it up as so much more than that for certain directors and whatnot. And it's really fascinating. And, you know, 4 episodes into this, it's going to be amazing seeing what we're going to get to speak about in the future. But we're kind of sort of running off sort of favorite scene stuff. I just loved the desert sequences at the start, when you're like, what on earth is this? What's it building up to? And very random, but that gets its payoff at the end as well. And it builds up the ambiguity of the film. Like, what are these close encounters? Because they're abducting people, but not abducting the ships, which I think is a really cool approach to it too. I think it gives it a bit of an edge compared to, oh, look, this ship's gone missing. It's actually like, it's turned up here and there's no one in there. And I think they're the questions that get the best answers. But going off that, I'm happy to move into final thoughts for everyone. Unless anyone has anything more to say, I'll jump in and say that I'm quite floored at this film. I'm surprised I've not seen it. I think I said last week that Close Encounters is probably the last big film of his I'd never seen. Out of like the mega Spielberg ones, which probably is in most people's top 5, top 8s. So I'm glad I've finally been able to tick this one off, which I keep saying a lot recently, which I really don't want to keep saying, because it looks bad for the series. But aside from that, it's just a wonderful sci-fi film, and I think for a genre that, as time has gone by, is been oversaturated, especially when you get towards that late 80s point. It's amazing to see something done so different, unique from the 70s that holds up today, because not many science fiction films hold up as years go by, let alone decades. And this is right up there, I think, with your Star Wars, is with your 2001s and some of those other ones that we've spoken about in the past. So for me, I think it's incredible, and I'm actually quite excited to see it again. I think it'll be really interesting on the second viewing.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I'll echo your thoughts verbatim, George, because it's one of my favorite Spielberg films, and yeah, it's a phenomenal piece of work.
I think it's also great as well, but I think one really interesting thing is, like, you look at Jaws, and since then there have been so many other shark films that are basically just Jaws rip-offs and trying to be like Jaws. But other than maybe Arrival, which you've already compared it to, I can't think of a single other film that is like this. And given it's over 40 years since it came out, it's quite impressive that there haven't been any other films, or many other films, I'm sure there are a few, that have tried to do something like this and been as successful. And I think that's just a testament to how good this film is, that you can't try and do it again. People haven't even bothered trying with it, it seems.
It's a really good point, and posing on a question as well. I wonder if, because people were trying to copy Star Wars, which is, it will be the last time I bring up in this video. I'm so sorry for everyone having getting sick and fed up of it. But, you know, it's such an important year for that genre and everything else. And I think it's a really good point, actually, when you brought up Jaws. You know, there are dozens of shark films, and they always say it's the best shark film since Jaws. It's like this. It's like the Ridley Scott's the best one. Every new Ridley Scott film's the best Ridley Scott film since Gladiator, isn't it? absolutely hate the billboard stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. There's not been anything like Close Encounters, and I think it's because it's such a unique approach and it's so difficult to get right. If there were ideas in today's day and age, could studios greenlight them? I don't think they would, which is a crying shame if someone does have a concept that could work. But at the same time, it would be hard to top something like this, if I'm being honest. So it's a really good point, Jed. But I'm going to use that. Let's round that review. So we want to hear from you. Maybe you've agreed with that statement. Maybe you disagree with it. Comment below your thoughts on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. As we said, it's been a really fun discussion today, guys. A classic film, and one I'm glad to do. We've got a lot catching up to, some behind the scenes, which I'm looking forward to. So please do comment, hit the subscribe button. If you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, then this is the place to be. We've got a lot more stuff coming. There's so many more videos. I'll talk about a couple of them coming very shortly. And before we do that, I'm just going to bring up where you can find them. So, Tom, I've got your blog rolling here, Films and Beer. Tell a few people that don't know what it's about, because they should go and check it out and drink.
Yeah, sure thing. It's essentially a film blog where I watch a film and then try and pair it with an appropriate beer. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's, the link between the two is tenuous, but it's a chance to watch films I've never seen and drink beer I've never tried.
Definitely. And Jed as well, where can people find you?
Yeah, so follow me on Twitter at Jed Wagman, or to find some of my film reviews, or subscribe to my YouTube channel to watch some exciting edits. I'm currently making a John Wick one where got a gunshot to every single beat of Mr. Blue Sky, which is kind of crazy. So keep an eye out for that coming soon.
No, definitely. So everyone, please do check both of them. There are links in the description as well. I believe it's the first video, Jez, but I've not mocked him for being younger than me as well, which is really nice, because I always feel really bad when I do it by accident. But no, this has been amazing to get you both on. I really appreciate you both taking time out of your day to be on this. And just quickly for people at home, if you want to find us on our socials, the best place to find us when we announce videos. This review, this is being pre-recorded in advance. This is Tuesday the 19th. This comes out. We are recording this over a week early. Our social medias, sometimes have reviews that pop up at the last minute that we can't speak about. The best way to find out about this is always getting us on Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy on there too, but mostly active on Twitter. And for those that are interested in the Spielberg stuff, the next film we have is 1941. That is going to be next Tuesday, the 26th of April. Tate is joining me for that one. He is very soon back from Austria, and there's a running gag that he's been in a different room for every video he's been on this year. So maybe that rule will change, maybe it won't. And I'm also going to bring up the graphic for where we're at so far with the Spielberg stuff. So as I mentioned, 1941 is coming soon, but even sooner than what we might believe, we've got Raiders of the Lost Ark backed up by E.T., which is a remarkable double. We've spoke a lot about E.T. tonight. I know that's a lot of people are attached to that. And then Twilight Zone, the movie. So we've got an interesting few weeks ahead on this. But once we get 1971 out of the way, 1941, sorry. I keep saying 1971. I really don't mean to do that. 1941 is next. And then obviously Indiana Jones kickstarting that trilogy, which is going to be a gargantuan discussion within itself. So once more, thank you all for watching at home. Thank you both for joining me today, and be sure to join us on the next one. Take care and thanks for watching.